Hey guys, tonight we step into the slow-building anxiety of flood season in ancient Egypt. Right when the air gets heavy, the river turns a shade darker, and you, yes, you, start pretending you're definitely not worried, even though every worker around you suddenly walks like they're carrying secret bad news. The banks rumble with low-water slaps. The sky feels too quiet, and somewhere a frog croaks like it knows something you don't. You're about to experience the world exactly as labourers did, watching the Nile rise inch by eerie inch, wondering whether this year it's going to bless your fields, or sweep away the whole neighbourhood before you even finish your breakfast. You probably won't survive this, emotionally at least, but don't panic. We're going slow and sleepy tonight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop your location and your local time in the comments so we can see where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the packed dirt path by the river, already feeling the subtle tension humming through the work crews. Each morning lately seems to start with someone muttering, "It's rising early," while someone else insists, "No, it's lower than my grandfather ever saw." You learn quickly that everyone becomes an expert hydrologist during flood season, even though none of you really understand how the Nile decides its mood. The only certainty, when the river rises, your work and your sleep get a whole lot more complicated. The scent of wet soil drifts across the fields, the kind that sticks in your nose until it becomes part of your personality. Historically, flood season was both a blessing and a threat, which is the exact kind of contradictory drama the Nile loves to bring into your life. Farmers depend on the flood for the nutrient-rich silt that feeds next year's crops. But workers like you worry more about whether your worksite will still exist tomorrow. Historians still argue whether the earliest workers feared the river itself or the unpredictable orders that came with it. But either way, you're losing sleep. You pause near a worn, sun-bleached marker stone. It looks harmless enough, a little block scored with notches to show past water levels, but you stare at it like it's a ticking clock. Someone carved a new line last year when the flood sat just a bit too high. Now you're mentally comparing it with where the water laps today. Is it closer? Has it moved since yesterday? Or did you just forget how numbers work? A co-worker squints and claims the river rose the width of a thumb overnight. Another argues it's actually dropped the width of a grain sack string. A third guy, who hasn't even looked, confidently declares it's definitely the same. What's the fringe tidbit here? Well, some villages supposedly relied on the way cows behaved. If they stood facing north at sunset, that meant flood danger. You can't help side-eyeing a cow or two just in case. As you walk, the chatter around you grows louder, quiet worries disguised as jokes. Someone laughs too forcefully about needing a boat for his house. Another brags he built his storage hut on higher ground, though everyone knows it's basically level with the river. The truth is, most workers feared flood season less for its physical danger, and more for the frantic relocations, the ruined tools, and the sudden shifts in labour demands. You've seen work details change overnight. One moment you're repairing stone blocks, the next you're knee-deep in muddy banks reinforcing canal walls. It keeps things interesting, sure, but also ruins any chance of planning your week like an organised adult. A warm breeze carries the smell of lotus blossoms, but also the unmistakable musk of a river that's waking up. You step closer to the edge and notice something unsettling. The waterline creeps over a patch of reeds that yesterday stood crisp and dry. You tell yourself it's fine, just a ripple, just the wind, but deep down you know these tiny signs matter. Ancient Egyptians watched the Nile the way modern people watch stock prices, obsessively, emotionally, and with mild stomach pain. Your sandals sink slightly into the softer soil near the edge. You shift backward quickly, pretending it's not because the mud felt way too clingy. Humour helps calm the nerves. One of your friends jokes that the river has a personal grudge against him ever since he dropped his lunch basket in it last year. You manage a laugh, though your mind keeps drifting back to those marker stones. If this year's flood rises just a little higher than usual, the entire worksite might become a swimming pool for very confused goats. A barge drifts past, its rowers chanting rhythmically. The sound is oddly soothing, like ancient ASMR. The captain shouts that water upstream is already swelling faster than expected. People nearby exchange glances, the kind that try very hard not to be called worried. You hear murmurs about unpredictable rains far to the south. Some say the gods are in a generous mood, others say the gods are bored and stirring trouble for entertainment. Honestly, both seem plausible. You crouch again to study the river. It's hard to tell whether the surface rises or whether your eyes are playing tricks on you. Maybe your expectations shape the water. Maybe the Nile is just messing with workers for fun. The thought isn't that far-fetched, considering how many ancient stories describe the river as a living being, temperamental, dramatic, and fond of surprise performances. You straighten, stretch your back, and exhale slowly. The day is only beginning, but already your mind feels like it's carrying sandbags of worry. Still, there's a strange peace in this moment too. The hum of insects, the shimmer of light on water, the low chatter of workers trying to pretend everything is normal. You keep walking, listening to each splash and slurp of the river, as if it's whispering secrets about what's coming. And as you continue along the bank, the entire season stretches before you, uncertain, muddy, and full of stories you're not ready to face just yet. You wake the next morning to the sound of hushed gossip drifting through camp, workers leaning over half-finished baskets, women grinding grain a little too slowly, older men stroking their chins like philosophers who forgot they aren't actually philosophers. Word is spreading upstream faster than the river itself. Rumours, half-true stories, and confidently wrong predictions carried from village to village, and you, still rubbing sleep from your eyes, find yourself caught in the middle of the Nile's annual guessing game. Someone passing by mutters, "They say the waters at Elephantine touched the third marker already." Another claims, No, it's lower, barely a trickle. My cousin's neighbour's sister said so." You have no idea who to believe. It's like trying to follow modern internet drama but using handwritten messages on clay tablets. By noon, you've heard at least 7 contradictory versions of the true situation upriver, and somehow all of them sound equally possible. You trudge toward the docks where incoming barges usually bring grain, pottery, and, if you're lucky, news. Today, they bring only more confusion. A boatman swears he saw the river swelling miles away. Another insists the water is dropping because the gods blinked twice during sunrise. He's probably misinterpreting something completely normal, but honestly, at this point you're ready to believe the sun is trying to send you coded messages. Historians still argue whether these travelling rumours were helpful, early warning systems, or just ancient Egyptian group chats gone chaotic. But either way, you're stuck sorting through them. A familiar fragrance of damp reeds fills the air as a barge glides in and docks with a soft thud. The rowers stretch, crack their backs, and immediately launch into a heated argument about what they saw upstream. One insists crocodiles were fleeing the banks, an omen of high water. Another claims hippos were lounging peacefully, proof of low water. A third, munching on dried figs, shrugs and says he didn't notice because he was busy trying not to fall overboard. You appreciate his honesty. You kneel to examine the cargo, but your mind keeps drifting toward the river. The current looks just a bit more impatient today, swirling in patterns that weren't there yesterday. Or maybe you're imagining it, influenced by all these dramatic river tales. A worker beside you whispers that he heard a priest proclaim, "This year's flood will be the one, the big one, high." Enough to wash away everyone's bad decisions. You secretly hope that's metaphorical. It's probably not. A quirky tidbit pops into conversation as an older man tells you that some villages rely on birds instead of priests. If herons gather in odd places, they're sure the flood is coming early. You glance around, half hoping to spot a heron, half hoping not to because the bird's decision will somehow feel more official than all the human arguments combined. A single heron stands on a rock and stares at you disapprovingly. You decide it's just judging your posture and not predicting doom. One barge captain approaches your crew, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Water's moving strange," he says. "Faster than usual. Slap my oars like it wanted to pick a fight." His tone is casual, but you see the worry tucked behind it. Nile boatmen aren't easily rattled. When they notice something off, the rest of you take it seriously. You glance back at the river, trying to see what he saw. The surface ripples sharply as if nudged from below. Work slows as people drift closer to the docks, pretending they're checking the cargo but actually eavesdropping. The tension feels oddly communal, like everyone is sharing one big collective stomachache. Someone jokes that if the rumours keep coming, the flood might get embarrassed and decide not to show up at all. You chuckle. grateful for the break in anxiety. A group of teenagers runs past shouting about having spotted driftwood from far southern territories. That's a real sign. Floodwaters often carry strange materials from distant regions. Wood, seeds, and once, according to a fringe story, a basket containing a single sandal. Scholars debate whether that sandal story is true or just the ancient equivalent of clickbait, but it remains a favourite tale among workers trying to lighten the mood. You walk down toward the shoreline where the river laps against the clay. There's a new damp line staining the mud, higher than yesterday, only by a finger's width, but still, you see it. And from the corner of your eye, so does everyone else. No one says anything, no one needs to. Rumours swirl like the water itself, messy, unpredictable, and working their way steadily downstream. You feel them pooling in your thoughts, shaping your day, tugging at your nerves. The sun warms your shoulders, yet a faint chill brushes your spine. The Nile always brings change, but never in the same way twice. You step back from the edge, letting the chatter fade behind you. But even as you return to your tasks, the whispers travel with you, settling into your mind like silt. And deep down, you know the river's real message hasn't arrived yet. You make your way toward the old measuring station, a squat stone platform built long before you were born, long before your parents were born, and possibly long before people even realized that arguing about the Nile was a national pastime. The markers carved. Into its walls are faded and uneven, each notch carrying a story you never asked to inherit. Still, workers gather here every morning like it's the world's most stressful scoreboard. You climb onto the platform and crouch beside the edge, peering down at the waterline. It clings to the stone like a stubborn shadow, shifting just enough to keep your nerves stimulated. The older man next to you strokes his beard thoughtfully and mutters, "It rose a finger." Another man immediately contradicts him. "Half a finger." A third insists it's 2 fingers and that everyone else is blind. You sigh. If the Nile ever held a democratic vote on its height, the empire would crumble. From here, you can see the full stretch of the measuring columns, ancient vertical grooves carved with symbols marking how high or low the annual flood sits. They're basically early Egyptian spreadsheets, except made of stone and harder to update. Historians still argue whether the markings were perfectly accurate or just close enough for government work, but either way, you rely on them. The sun warms your back as you lean closer. The river's surface flickers against the stone in a way that makes the depth hard to judge. The current pulls gently, whispering like it has secrets but won't share them yet. You take a reed and dip it down to test the level. When you lift it, water drips off the tip, slightly higher than the last time you checked. Or maybe your memory is fuzzy, or maybe reeds lie. A fringe rumour surfaces in your mind. Someone once claimed these measuring pits were haunted by spirits who push the water up or down depending on their mood. Supposedly, if you stare too long, the ghosts stare back. You make a point of not staring too long, just in case. Workers gather behind you, forming a small crowd. They pretend they're here to help, but really they're all hoping you'll announce something definitive. You don't. You're not about to become this season's Nile guy, the poor soul who predicts the flood wrong and gets mocked for a decade. Instead, you step aside and let someone else take the read, repeating the exact same motion, getting the exact same result, and confidently declaring a completely different measurement. Classic. Despite the chaos, there's something comforting about the scene. People gathered close, muttering quietly, reviewing each notch and symbol like scholars deciphering a mystery. You run your fingers along the stone carvings, still cool from morning shade. Some of the markers date back to when pharaohs were more myth than memory, their reigns etched here in lines of rising and falling water. A gentle breeze rolls in, carrying the scent of silt, wet clay, and river plants. It's the familiar perfume of flood season, earthy, thick, and unmistakably anxious. You breathe it in, letting it settle into your senses as a reminder of how deeply this cycle has shaped every moment of your life. A younger worker taps, you on the shoulder. "Did you hear?" he whispers dramatically. "A nilometer upstream cracked last night." You raise an eyebrow. "Cracked?" He nods solemnly. "Split clean down the middle. My cousin's friend told me." You almost laugh. His cousin's friend is notorious for embellishing stories, and a nilometer splitting is about as likely as a pyramid sprouting legs and walking off. But rumour season logic is different. Everything feels possible. You step down from the platform and wander to the narrow channel that leads into the measuring pool. The water here is calmer, protected from the main current. You crouch, touching the surface lightly, cool, smooth, deceptive. It looks peaceful now, but you know how quickly this quiet can turn into chaos. One heavy rainfall hundreds of miles to the south, and the entire empire feels the consequences. Nearby, two overseers argue in low voices. One swears the level is rising dangerously fast. The other accuses him of exaggerating. You recognize this pattern. Disagreement means uncertainty, and uncertainty means tension. You try to ignore them, but the words drift to you anyway, planting little seeds of worry in your mind. Another fringe tidbit crosses your memory. Workers used to carve secret marks higher up the stones, believing it would encourage the Nile to stay within safe limits, as if the river cared about their wishful graffiti. You glance around, half expecting to find some new hopeful scratch in the stone. The crowd slowly disperses, returning to their tasks. You remain for a moment longer, tracing the worn grooves with a fingertip. These markers have seen centuries of floods, fears, hopes, and arguments. They've witnessed seasons where the Nile failed entirely, and seasons where it surged higher than anyone believed possible. Now they're watching this year unfold, and so are you. You straighten up, dusting your hands on your linen kilt. The day grows warmer, cicadas beginning their droning chorus. The air vibrates with anticipation, the kind that settles deep into your bones. Whatever the river intends, you know the truth. The measuring stones don't lie, but the people reading them definitely do. You hike back toward the worksite with the sun climbing high, only to stop short when you notice something unsettling. Part of the familiar path you've walked every day for months, maybe years, has simply ceased to exist. Gone. Vanished under a slick sheet of water that wasn't there yesterday. The reeds you used to swat out of your way now sway gently beneath the surface, looking like they've been caught committing a crime. You stand there for a second, blinking, hoping the path will magically reappear if you squint hard enough. Spoiler, it does not. You take a careful step closer, and your sandal sinks into mud that grips you like it's trying to start a conversation. You pull back immediately, managing a dramatic hop that earns a chuckle from a coworker. "The Nile likes you," he jokes. "Must be your winning personality." You mutter something sarcastic under your breath, because if the river really liked you, it wouldn't eat your commute. A mainstream fact whispers through your mind. Egyptian labourers often shifted entire work sites during the inundation, abandoning half-finished ramps, quarry trenches and temporary shelters as the water crept in. Flood season wasn't just a geographical inconvenience, it was a logistical disaster disguised as a natural miracle. You watch as several workers poke around the edges of the encroaching water, all trying to figure out exactly how much ground was stolen overnight. Farther along the bank, a pile of limestone blocks sits partially submerged. Yesterday, those stones were dry enough for a cat to nap on. Today, they glisten like they're auditioning for a river-themed photo shoot. A builder groans loudly, muttering that he just organised those blocks by size. You offer a sympathetic nod. Flood season respects neither craftsmanship nor emotional investment. A fringe tidbit comes to mind. Some villages believed mischievous river spirits snuck around at night rearranging the landscape just to keep humans humble. Considering how fast your worksite seems to be dissolving, you're not ruling it out. You glance suspiciously at the water, half expecting to catch a ghostly figure giggling beneath the ripples. You walk carefully around the drowned path, navigating a new route you didn't sign up for. The ground squishes unpleasantly, and every few steps your foot threatens to sink deeper than socially acceptable. You pass a crew trying to salvage tools from the edge of the rising water. A long-handled chisel lies half-hidden in the mud. When someone tries to pull it free, the mud makes a sticky slurping sound that's entirely too biological for your liking. Beyond them, the storage yard looks like it suffered a minor amphibious invasion. Straw baskets float in little clusters, spinning lazily like confused water lilies. Someone's rope coil drifts by at a steady pace, and the owner bolts after it with the urgency of a man who just saw his paycheck floating away. You shout encouragement, because sometimes moral support is all you can offer. The overseers gather on a dry patch of ground, speaking in the stiff tones of people trying very hard not to panic. You catch snippets, shift the tools, relocate the northern teams. Tell the scribes to update the inventory. The scribes look horrified. They didn't sign up for running during flood season. You wander into the main building area, relieved to see most structures still intact, though the edges look soggy enough to concern even the most chill worker. A couple of makeshift ramps have sagged, their mud brick surfaces slumping like tired shoulders. You touch one experimentally. It's still firm in the middle, but the sides crumble at your fingertips. Not great. One worker beside you sighs dramatically. "All that work," he mutters. "Was this flood raised by jealous brickmakers?" You grin. Humour is survival. Another man chimes in, "Maybe if we compliment the river it'll go down." He turns to the water and declares, "Oh powerful, beautiful Nile, your levels are completely appropriate." The water continues rising. Tough crowd. As you move deeper into the worksite, you can't help noticing how quiet people are becoming. Not silent. Egyptians are never silent. But the chatter feels thinner now, like everyone's busy calculating their next steps. A worksite vanishing isn't unusual during inundation, but it always feels like a little personal betrayal. You spend months shaping stone, hauling supplies, building structures you're told will last generations, and then the river waltzes in and decides to redecorate. Historians still argue whether these seasonal disruptions strengthened community bonds, forcing workers to adapt together, or whether they undermined morale by constantly undoing progress. Judging by your co-workers' expressions right now, you'd vote for undermined morale, but the debate marches on somewhere in the future while you're stuck wringing mud from your hem. As the day wears on, the sun climbs higher, and the edges of the workspace dissolve further. You wander toward the northern corner, where a shallow ramp once led down to the supply area. Now, the ramp ends abruptly in waist-deep water, the submerged path shimmering like a portal to a less convenient dimension. The reflection on the surface shows the remaining structures trembling slightly in the current. They'll hold, probably. By late afternoon, workers begin moving what supplies they can, forming ragged lines to relocate baskets, stone chips, wooden tools, and, crucially, the communal food jars. You join in, hefting a heavy pot of barley with a grunt loud enough to earn applause from a few nearby friends. "Look at you," one jokes. "Flood season hasn't drowned your spirit." You roll your eyes, but secretly the encouragement helps. The river keeps creeping, inch by inch, quiet, persistent, unbothered by your collective efforts. You glance back at the path you used to take every morning. It's gone entirely now, swallowed under the shifting water. You realize with a soft exhale that tomorrow, even more will be gone. And this is only the beginning. You wake the next day already knowing something is off. Not because of the river this time, but because your overseers are pacing the banks before sunrise, their linen kilts whipping slightly in the breeze like anxious little flags. Overseers don't usually move this fast unless they're either very excited about a new stone delivery, rare, or deeply stressed about the flood, common. Judging by the way they're double-checking their tablets and muttering through gritted teeth, today leans firmly toward deeply stressed. You trudge toward them, rubbing your eyes, wishing you could crawl back into your sleeping mat and pretend none of this was happening. No luck. The moment you arrive, one of the overseers gestures sharply at the river as if that explains everything, and to be fair, it kind of does. The Nile looks busier, faster, hungrier, like it woke up this morning and chose extra dramatic for its personality. One supervisor, a man famous for pretending everything's fine even while things are literally on fire, stands with his arms folded, jaw tight. "Still within acceptable levels," he says, voice calm but eyes screaming unacceptable. Another supervisor beside him shakes his head, pointing at the measuring marks on his notepad. "We lost another cubit last night," he whispers. "The river swallowed half the southern yard." You raise your eyebrows. That's not ideal. A mainstream fact pops into your mind. During the inundation, upper officials had to constantly recalculate labour schedules, rations and construction deadlines, often based on wild guesses. Written records from various periods show frantic adjustments, sometimes daily, because workers couldn't keep shaping stone when their work sites suddenly turned into a temporary lake. Watching the overseers now, you get the feeling this tradition of panic is very alive. One of them kneels at the muddy edge, squinting at the shifting current. He taps the ground with a stick, makes a note, taps again, then sighs heavily. You're no expert, but you're pretty sure that sigh means, "Everything just got harder and I want to lie down." You sympathize deeply. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you listen. Some flood season supervisors reportedly tried bribing the river with small offerings: bread, beer, fruits, even shiny stones. Not officially, of course. These were off the record, maybe it'll help gestures. You can't help imagining your overseer chucking a basket of figs into the water like, "Please be chill this year." Honestly, worth a try. You shuffle closer, joining a growing half-circle of workers pretending not to eavesdrop. The overseers keep pretending they don't notice you, even though they definitely do. One pulls out a wooden surveying staff, dips it into the water, then pulls it back up with an expression usually reserved for discovering one's cat has eaten the grocery rations. "It climbed again," he says quietly. Everyone around you inhales sharply. Supervisors begin whispering fiercely. Work rotations must change. Stone hauling must pause. The canal reinforcement must start sooner. And, crucially, someone needs to go notify the temple scribes before the scribes claim ignorance and throw an administrative tantrum. A younger overseer scribbles so fast his reed pen squeaks. "If it rises another palm between now and noon, we'll have to move the western crew entirely," he mutters. Again. You rub the back of your neck. The western crew just rebuilt their storage tent yesterday after the river politely dissolved it. Moving them again feels cruel. The supervisors split off, each darting toward a different group of workers. Orders ripple outward. "Pack the tools! Shift the sledges! Clear the channels! Don't let anything float away unless you want your pay docked." You get assigned to tool relocation duty, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. You lift baskets of chisels, mallets, and ropes, some already damp, and carry them farther inland. Every few minutes you glance back at the overseers. They're still pacing, still muttering, still calculating. Their expressions change with every new splash along the bank. The river creeps forward another inch. The overseers creep forward another inch too, trying to inspect without stepping into the mud. One inevitably does step into the mud. It makes a loud, squishy glorp that nearly swallows his sandal. Everyone pretends not to laugh. You fail at pretending. Historians still argue whether ancient overseers were genuinely skilled planners or simply skilled at looking like skilled planners. Watching yours scramble around with worried eyebrows and contradictory measurements, you lean toward the latter interpretation, but respectfully. Supervising is hard when the river decides to do freestyle improvisation. By midday, their pacing evolves into full laps along the bank. One gestures wildly at the waterline. Another waves his hand like he's swatting imaginary flies. Another stands perfectly still, staring into the current like he's waiting for the Nile to apologize. You help shift a wooden beam, glancing toward them as you work. Their body language changes every few minutes, stiff one moment, frantic the next. You can almost read their thoughts. How many supplies will flood? How many workdays lost? Will the priests blame us? Should we start bribing the river? Should we start bribing the priests? Should I start a new career? Someone murmurs behind you. They're more nervous than we are. You nod. Workers fear the flood for practical reasons. Overseers fear the flood for political ones. By late afternoon, the supervisors finally gather again, forming a tight cluster, like birds preparing for migration. One clears his throat and announces, "We'll shift the entire operation inland by 30 paces, start packing quickly." A collective groan rises from the workers, but you don't argue. You pick up your pack, sling a bundle of tools over your shoulder, and start the long process of relocating again. As the sun sinks, the overseers patrol the bank once more, torches in hand, shadows wavering behind them. They're tired, worried, trying to look in control. The river doesn't care, and you, watching their anxious silhouettes against the darkening water, realize something undeniable. The flood season has truly begun, because the overseers have lost their calm. You're halfway through moving yet another bundle of ropes when someone shouts, "Look! By the reeds!" The tone is too sharp, too startled for it to be anything good. You drop the ropes in a graceless heap. Future, you can deal with the tangles and hurry toward the commotion. A cluster of workers stands at the shoreline, pointing uneasily at something drifting just beneath the surface. At first you think it's just another log. Then the log blinks. Your stomach tightens. That is not a log. A broad ridged back glides through the murky water, barely breaking the surface, but enough for the early morning sun to catch the faint gleam of scales. The creature drifts closer, slow, deliberate, absolutely confident. You and your co-workers shuffle backward in unison, like professionally choreographed panic dancers. Crocodiles aren't supposed to be here. Not this close to camp, not this early in the season. but the rising water has apparently sent them exploring, and you're not thrilled to be part of their tour route. A mainstream fact flickers in your mind. During the seasonal inundation, crocodiles often ventured into newly flooded areas, finding easy hunting where animals and humans were displaced. Ancient reliefs and texts mention surprise crocodile appearances during high water as a genuine hazard. You glance at the drifting shape, thinking, yep, genuine hazard confirmed. The creature pauses, half submerged, as though assessing whether anyone looks snack-like today. You subtly shift behind a slightly taller co-worker, just in case the crocodile is making a list. Humour helps. Also, sacrificial positioning. Someone whispers, "What is it doing here?" Another replies, "Probably looking for a better neighbourhood." A third murmurs, "Maybe it wants to borrow a cup of barley." Nervous laughter bubbles up. You're all trying very hard to be brave and succeeding very poorly. The crocodile's tail flicks lazily, sending ripples outward. It glides along the submerged path you used to walk, like it owns the place now. And honestly, as far as the river is concerned, it does. You swallow hard. Flood season always brings surprises, but reptilian visitors are definitely on the list of least welcome surprises. A quirky tidbit surfaces from memory, the kind of fringe story older workers love repeating. Some believed that crocodiles were guided by mischievous gods to check whether humans were respecting the rhythms of the flood. If a crocodile wandered somewhere it shouldn't, it meant workers had angered a spirit or neglected a ritual. You glance back at the priest's compound and mutter, "Well, if we forgot something, now would be a good time to fix it." The crocodile drifts closer still, its snout slicing through the water like a slow-moving danger sign. Workers scatter back until they're nearly tripping over each other. Even the overseers, who pride themselves on appearing unfazed at all times, retreat a respectful distance. One of them attempts an authoritative voice but cracks slightly when he shouts, "Everyone, step back, calmly!" You give him credit for trying. The creature eventually turns, cruising lazily along the submerged edge of the camp. You breathe out slowly, realizing you are holding your breath for way too long. The moment the crocodile disappears behind a cluster of reeds, the camp erupts into chatter. Everyone talks at once, voices climbing over each other like overly excited pigeons. You hear theories, wild ones. One man insists it must mean the water upstream is rising faster than expected. Crocodiles always arrive before the surge, he says confidently. Another mutters that the river is reclaiming its territory and sending scouts. A third claims he saw 2 crocodiles, not one, which is almost definitely false, but adds drama to his retelling. Historians still argue whether fear of crocodiles influenced how workers built early flood banks, whether certain bends in canals were designed specifically to discourage reptilian intruders. Looking at your worksite now, you think, yes, probably yes. You decide to check the bank again carefully, keeping a respectful 10 paces between you and the water. The surface is calm now, deceptively serene. Dragonflies dance above it, skimming the ripples like tiny acrobats who don't realize a prehistoric predator is lurking below their stage. The reeds sway gently. Everything looks normal. Too normal. A co-worker approaches you quietly. "You think it'll come back?" he asks. You shrug. "Maybe, maybe not." You try to sound reassuring, but a sliver of worry worms its way into your tone. Animals don't move without reason. If crocodiles are drifting closer to human camps, the water might be rising faster, or differently than usual. A ripple disturbs the surface nearby. You jump. A fish leaps. You pretend you definitely knew it was a fish the whole time. The overseers gather again, speaking in low, urgent voices. One gestures toward the water, shaking his head. Another writes something frantically on his tablet. A third presses his palm to his forehead in the universal sign for "I want to go home." You join a team relocating supplies farther inland. Again. Each time you lift a crate or basket, you can't help scanning the river. It's not the physical danger that bothers you most. It's the unpredictability. Flood season throws curveballs, but crocodiles drifting toward your workspace feels like the river is throwing a whole javelin. As you work, a thought settles into you, a heavy, quiet realization. When animals start moving differently, the river is changing more than you know. You pause, wipe the sweat from your brow, and look once more toward the reeds, half expecting to see those cold eyes peering back. They don't appear. But you walk a little faster anyway. By the time the sun tilts past its highest point, the camp is buzzing with a new urgency. Not the frantic kind, more like a quiet, resigned shuffle that says, "Yep, it's that time of year again." Word spreads quickly. The crews are moving. Again. You sigh, because your shoulders are already sore from all the relocating you've done this week, and your bedroll has started developing trust issues. You gather your belongings, your sleeping mat, the small clay cup you guard like a precious heirloom, your threadbare blanket, and the few tools assigned to your team. The path uphill is crowded with other workers doing the same, each person moving with that special flood season combination of annoyance and acceptance. No one likes shifting camp, but everyone knows arguing with the Nile is like arguing with a camel. Pointless and mildly dangerous. As you walk, you pass groups already staking out new sites farther inland. One man is hammering wooden pegs into the earth with the passion of someone who dearly wants this to be the last time he has to do this. Another is unrolling a woven mat, muttering angrily about how he just cleaned it yesterday. You call out a sympathetic same, because shared suffering builds community. A mainstream fact floats to mind. Egyptian labourers routinely shifted their camps during inundation, setting up temporary shelters that could be taken down and reassembled quickly as the water rose. Archaeological digs have uncovered traces of these shifting encampments, layers of ash, scattered pottery, and worn patches of ground showing repeated short-term occupation. You look at the trampled dirt beneath your feet and think, give it a couple thousand years and someone's going to be brushing this spot with a fancy little brush. A quirky tidbit follows. Some workers believe that choosing a lucky sleeping direction could protect them from flood spirits. East-west was good, north-south was less good. You glance down at your mat, silently promising to sleep facing every direction at once, if it means avoiding more surprises this season. You hike farther uphill, the air slightly cooler, and the ground beautifully, blessedly dry. Workers start dropping their bundles and claiming patches of land with the speed of people trying to grab the best seats at a festival. You find a spot near a scraggly acacia tree, just enough shade to feel civilized, just enough distance from the latrine area to feel safe. You set down your bundle with a sigh that's equal parts exhaustion and triumph. Around you, camp assembly begins like a messy but well-practiced orchestra. Poles clatter, mats unroll. Someone argues loudly about the correct angle for the windbreak. Someone else insists that this year the wind feels different, which instantly sparks debate. You join a small crew hammering stakes into the ground, trying to ignore the rhythmic squelching of mud below as another section of the lower camp succumbs to the river. Historians still argue whether shifting camps strengthened worker unity or simply increased everyone's daily misery. Watching your co-workers help each other despite the fatigue, offering spare mats, sharing rope, lending a hand, you're inclined to think unity wins, though the misery is definitely present too. A group of teenagers passes, carrying firewood and bragging about who can build the fastest shelter. One nearly drops his bundle after stepping into a patch of hidden mud. The splash is impressive, the shriek even more so. You laugh gently. Flood season humour is a coping mechanism, even as you check your own path carefully. You spread out your bedroll and smooth the edges with your foot. The ground here is firm, dust dry, a rare luxury. You press your palms against it, grounding yourself after a day of hauling, shifting, worrying, and avoiding crocodiles you did not sign up to meet. This spot, this humble, slightly slanted piece of earth, feels like a win. Your neighbours begin settling in. A woman lays out a woven mat, humming a tune that drifts softly through the warm air. Two older men argue about which direction the sun rises from, even though both watched it this morning. A child toddles by holding a clump of dirt like it's a prized artifact. Life begins reshaping itself instantly. You take a moment to breathe, in, out. The new camp smells like dust, dry grass, and faint traces of last season's charcoal. Comforting, in a way the river's scent hasn't been lately. You start to unroll your blanket, spreading it into a lumpy rectangle of home. The shade from the acacia tree dances over it in shifting patterns, soft and soothing. A co-worker plops down beside you with an exaggerated groan. "Think we'll have to move again?" he asks. You shrug. The truth? Probably. But you're not ready to admit that aloud. Instead you say, "Maybe the river will take a nap," he snorts. "Yeah, and maybe my uncle's donkey will learn math." You both laugh quietly. enjoying the brief moment of peace. The river murmurs below, its constant voice. But from up here the sound is softer, almost gentle. Almost. You lean back on your hands and watch as the last rays of the afternoon light skim the horizon. Camp is nearly rebuilt. Fires are being prepared, rations distributed. A sense of temporary normalcy settles like dust on warm stone. For a little while, just a little, you let yourself feel safe. Because tomorrow the river decides everything, and you'll move again if you have to. You don't even make it halfway through your morning tasks before the ground betrays you again. One moment you're walking confidently across what looks like a perfectly fine patch of earth, and the next your sandal plunges into mud so sticky it feels like the Nile is trying to claim you as a long-term emotional investment. You wobble, flail, and narrowly avoid face-planting into a puddle that smells like yesterday's reeds and last. Weeks' regrets. You yank your foot upward. The mud yanks back. Hard. Someone behind you snorts. Careful, the ground eats tools and workers. You glare at them, but they're not wrong. During flood season, the mud develops a personality. Hungry, spiteful, and weirdly selective. It doesn't just get soggy. It becomes a living entity determined to consume anything unlucky enough to step into it. A mainstream fact makes the situation even more impressive. Ancient Egyptian workers often complained, in surviving notes and graffiti, about losing tools in the mud during inundation. Chisels, baskets, wooden pegs, even sandals vanished into the ooze, never to be seen again. You guess those weren't exaggerations. You take one step backward, slowly, gently, trying not to summon the mud's wrath. It releases you with a reluctant slurp, as if letting you go out of pity rather than defeat. Your sandal is coated in a thick, dark layer that adds about 2 extra kilograms to your daily workload. Lovely. Around you, the worksite is turning into an obstacle course of treacherous patches. A young worker tries to lift a basket only to discover the basket is now fused with the earth. You watch as he tugs harder and harder, until the handle snaps and the mud keeps the rest like a trophy. Unbelievable, he groans. It swallowed the whole thing. Another worker shrugs. Add it to the river's growing collection. A fringe tidbit comes to mind. Some people believed that certain patches of flood mud were enchanted, said to contain the essence of the earth god Geb. Stepping into one without respect supposedly angered the spirit. You glance at your muddy sandal and whisper, "Sorry, Geb," just in case. You could use goodwill from the gods right now. Nearby, a group of workers attempt to retrieve a long wooden sledge stuck nose first in the sludge. 4 people pull while one pushes. The sledge refuses to budge. It is now, apparently, an offering to the soft, sticky deities of the floodplain. When the men finally succeed in prying it loose, the mud lets go with such a violent gloop that 2 of them fall backward. A third loses his sandal entirely. Everyone laughs for a full minute because flood season slapstick is honestly the best comedy around. You carefully navigate the edge of a large puddle, stepping only on dry patches. The mud here is trickier. Thin on top, thick underneath. You poke it with a stick. The stick sinks halfway before you pull it back, minus its tip. Great, you mutter. Now even sticks aren't safe. One of the overseers strolls by, trying, unsuccessfully, to look dignified as he nearly steps into a mud pit himself. He recovers with a cough and a stiff nod, pretending no one saw. You saw. Everyone saw. And it brings you just the smallest spark of joy. The mud begins creeping into the storage zones again. You wade in carefully, helping salvage what you can. Jars, ropes, chipped stone blocks waiting to be shaped. Every item you pick up seems heavier than it should be, the mud clinging to it with the determination of a toddler refusing to let go of a toy. You shake each object vigorously, sending wet clumps flying. One lands squarely on your co-worker's shoulder. They look at you with the expression of someone deciding whether to laugh or cry. You choose laughter for them. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians engineered specific drainage systems for work sites or simply relied on sheer manpower and salty determination. Judging by your current experience, it was probably the latter. You've yet to see a drainage trench that looks even remotely helpful. You shift to higher ground, carrying tools wrapped carefully in linen to protect them from the creeping sludge. A rhythmic squelch follows you, your sandals now making noises that would make a hippo blush. You try to shake off the mud while you walk, but each attempt only redistributes it, smearing your legs, your kilt, Everything. You look like a walking clay figurine. A co-worker chuckles. Nice new outfit, he teases. You throw him a dramatic bow. At the stone carving area, the mud has claimed an entire row of chipped blocks. They sit half-submerged like half-drowned hippos, doomed but majestic. Someone tries to lift one and immediately regrets their life choices. Another just stares at the mess and sighs, long and loud. You kneel to salvage a chisel you spot sticking out of the mud. You grab the handle, pull harder, and then with a wet schlorp the mud releases it like it's spitting out a bone. You triumphantly raise the chisel like a hero until you realize the blade is still buried somewhere below. Great, you say, staring at the sad wooden handle. Perfect. All around you, the sight becomes a chaotic blend of squelching, swearing, slipping, and determined rescue missions. It's messy, it's exhausting, it's slightly hilarious. If the Nile is a stern parent, then the mud is the mischievous toddler gleefully undoing all the hard work around it. By midday, you're coated up to your knees. You smell like ancient silt. Your muscles ache from repeatedly extracting yourself from quicksand-adjacent pits. But you keep going, because flood season never slows for anyone. And as you haul another mud-soaked basket toward the new camp, you swear you hear the river chuckle. Or maybe that's just your co-worker sinking behind you again. By the time the sun pushes through the haze of morning, you can already sense a shift in the camp. Not in the mud, not in the water levels, but in the food. Or rather, the lack of it. Breakfast feels suspiciously lighter. Your barley porridge looks like someone whispered the idea of barley over a pot of hot water and called it a day. You hold up the bowl, tilting it. It sloshes. Too much slosh. Not enough barley. You glance at the ration tent where workers gather in a line that grows longer by the minute. Everyone is pretending this is normal, but the way they shuffle and quietly grumble betrays the truth. Grain allowances have thinned again. And thinning rations are the most reliable sign of flood season stress. More reliable than water markers, rumours, or crocodiles. A mainstream fact nudges at your thoughts. Ancient Egypt's flood season often disrupted supply routes, temporarily reducing available grain. Rations became smaller, meals simpler, and workers felt the pressure in their stomachs long before they saw it in the accounting tablets. Today, you feel it deeply. Your stomach feels like it's filing a formal complaint. You sit beside a co-worker who's staring mournfully into his own nearly transparent porridge. Is this food, he asks, or a suggestion? You stir your bowl. It's an aspiration, you reply. That earns a weak chuckle. Flood season humour at its finest. Nearby, a scribe carefully unrolls a fresh ration ledger, squinting at the columns as if the numbers personally offended him. A delivery clerk approaches, arms full of half-empty grain sacks. The scribe sighs so loudly it stirs the air. This won't last the week, he mutters. Maybe not even 3 days. You watch him make quick adjustments to the distribution list, changing numbers, narrowing columns, biting his lip. A fringe tidbit pops into your memory. Some workers believed that eating fewer grains during flood season made their bodies lighter, helping them move through mud more easily. You're not buying that. You feel tired, not buoyant. If anything, the mud is winning because you're less fueled, not more aerodynamic. The overseers gather again in their now familiar storm cloud huddle. You overhear fragments: caravans delayed, grain barge stuck, southern fields underwater. All terrible news. One of them rubs his temples with both hands, the universal gesture of someone who has officially reached their bureaucratic limit. The ration line gets no shorter. Workers emerge with bowls of watery mush, some staring at them like they're trying to solve a philosophical puzzle. Is this lunch or punishment? One person decides to eat slowly, savouring each tiny grain like it's gold dust. Another just drinks the whole bowl like soup and wipes his mouth with heroic resignation. Your friend leans closer. I heard the priests are keeping extra grain locked away, he whispers. For the temple animals, you shrug. Temple animals get fed like royalty. Everyone knows that. It's one of those facts that makes sense on paper and feels unfair in your stomach. Historians still argue whether temples hoarded grain during flood crises or simply rationed it with strict precision. Judging from the camp gossip today, workers firmly believe in the hoarded version. Reality is probably somewhere in the middle, but your appetite isn't interested in nuance right now. By midday, you're helping unload a small emergency grain delivery. Delivery meaning a single donkey carrying 2 small sacks, both lighter than they look. The poor animal looks embarrassed. The driver looks defensive. "It's all we could get," he announces. "Floods closed the lower route." Everyone nods politely, silently blaming him anyway. You carry one of the sacks back to the ration tent, aware of how much lighter it feels than last week's. When you set it down, dust puffs out. Grain dust, not grain. A child helping in the tent coughs and fans the air with a woven fan. Ration time begins again in the late afternoon. You line up with your bowl, feeling the usual dread. When your turn comes, the server ladles out your portion with exaggerated care, as if the porridge might evaporate before hitting your bowl. You try to smile. It turns into more of a grimace. You sit on a small mat beneath your favourite acacia tree, taking slow bites. The porridge tastes fine, just painfully boring and painfully sparse. You try not to think about the day still ahead. Flood season doesn't end quickly, and every centimetre the water rises means another day of stretched supplies. Your co-worker plops down beside you with a sigh. "If this keeps up," he says, "I'll start eating papyrus." You deadpan, chewy, but high in fibre. You both chuckle quietly, one of the required 3 jokes per 1,000 words, and return to your bowls. You watch the ration tent for a moment longer. People come and go with heavy shoulders and lighter meals. It's a simple rhythm, a predictable one, yet somehow it feels heavier this season. You finish the last spoonful, scraping the bottom for any grain that dared cling to the surface. Then you set the bowl aside with a gentle thud, letting the warm breeze brush your face. Flood season isn't just about rising water, it's about shrinking comfort, and your stomach knows it better than anyone. As the afternoon sun slides across the sky, you notice a steady trickle of white-robed figures making their way toward the riverbank. Priests from the nearest temple, walking with that floaty, serene posture that seems genetically engineered to irritate hungry, mud-covered workers. Their sandals barely pick up dirt. Their linen robes remain crisp even in humidity that makes your clothes wilt. And somehow, they always smell faintly of incense instead of sweat and despair. Must be nice. You lean on a wooden post, watching them gather in a semicircle near a shaded patch of stone. The moment they arrive, the overseers suddenly straighten their backs and pretend they've been calm all day. It's adorable, really, like watching cats try to act dignified after falling off a ledge. One priest kneels at the river's edge, trailing his fingers in the water, murmuring something too soft for you to hear. Another studies the horizon as if expecting a handwritten note from the gods to float by. A third flips open a beautifully decorated tablet covered in neat, impossible-to-read symbols. You raise an eyebrow. Ah, the seasonal ritual of pretending to know exactly what the gods want. A mainstream fact crosses your mind. Priests in ancient Egypt often acted as interpreters of natural events, especially during the inundation. They provided spiritual context, sometimes reassurance, sometimes warnings, based on rituals, astronomical observations, and generations of tradition. Their words carried serious weight, shaping public perception of the flood's meaning. And right now, the workers around you are eyeing the priests like contestants watching a judge taste their food. One of the priests begins chanting softly, rhythmic and soothing, a sound that floats across the water like a warm breeze. You're not sure what he's saying, but the cadence is calming enough to make you feel briefly less stressed about the mud currently trying to eat half the work site. People gather closer, not too close because no one wants to be accidentally recruited for a purification ceremony, but close enough to listen. Then the debates start. 2 priests begin quietly arguing, pointing at the river level and making increasingly dramatic hand gestures. You can't hear every word, but you catch phrases like sign of blessing and omen of imbalance. One insists the flood's early rise means the gods are pleased, rewarding the land with fertile silt. Another claims it signals divine irritation, suggesting someone, maybe everyone, has angered a particular god by neglecting a ritual, or leaving an offering half-chewed by goats. Historians still argue whether ancient priests genuinely disagreed during flood readings, or simply performed these debates theatrically to impress onlookers. Watching these 2 right now, one waving his arms like a frustrated goose, and the other clutching his tablet like it's a shield, you strongly suspect the disagreement is very real. Behind you, a co-worker whispers, "If they argue about the flood, what hope do we have?" You shrug. "Maybe the gods like watching them fight." He snorts. "Same." A quirky tidbit bubbles up from your memory. In some regions, priests claimed they could predict the flood's height based on the behavior of sacred temple geese. If the geese splashed more than usual, it meant high water. If they sat still, low water. You glance toward the nearest temple courtyard, half expecting to see a flock of geese performing interpretive dance. Thankfully, the geese are nowhere in sight today, otherwise the debates would never end. One priest steps forward as if preparing to deliver a grand announcement. Everyone straightens, workers, overseers, even a couple of children perched on a boulder. The priest clears his throat dramatically. "The river rises," he says. You blink. "Yes, that's very helpful." He continues. "The signs are mixed. The gods send both warning and promise. The water brings cleansing and danger." You nod slowly. Classic priest talk. Poetic, vague, theoretically wise, practically useless. You can tell the overseers were hoping for something more specific, like, "The flood will stop on Wednesday," or "Move your camp 15 paces east." But no one gets that lucky. The priests resume their debate, now involving a third member who looks like he overslept and missed half the context. He immediately chooses a side, which only fuels the argument further. Their voices rise, hands wave. One of them steps too close to the mud and makes a very unpriestly sound when his sandal sinks. You probably weren't supposed to enjoy that moment as much as you did. As the sun lowers, the priests finally reach a conclusion. Rituals will be performed tonight. Offerings will be made. Additional prayers at dawn. And everyone should remain vigilant yet trusting. You suppress a groan. That's spiritual code for good luck, everyone. We have no idea what's happening either. The workers drift away, murmuring and speculating. Some feel comforted. Priests have that effect. Some feel more nervous. Some just want dinner. You linger a moment, watching the priests file away like elegant herons returning to their roost. Their silhouettes glow gold against the fading light. You realize something about flood season you never quite articulated to yourself before. It isn't just the rising water that unsettles people. It's the confusion, the uncertainty, the waiting, and the desperate hope that someone, anyone, can interpret the signs. But as you head back toward camp, the river continues flowing, utterly unbothered by your worries or the priest's debates. Silent, mysterious, in charge. By the next morning, the flood shows you one of its strangest habits, bringing gifts you absolutely did not ask for. You make your way down to the water's edge, keeping a cautious distance because you still vividly remember the crocodile incident and immediately notice odd objects drifting lazily in with the current. Not dangerous things this time, just weird things. Things that clearly did not originate anywhere near your work site. The first item you spot is a half-rotten gourd bobbing along like it's on vacation. Then a cluster of reeds woven into a shape that might have been a basket once, or possibly an ancient attempt at modern art. A co-worker nudges you and points farther out. Is that a bird's nest? It is. An entire bird's nest riding the water like a tiny confused boat. The bird itself is nowhere in sight, possibly filing a complaint with the gods about flood season travel conditions. A mainstream fact drifts into your mind. The annual inundation carried debris from hundreds of miles upriver. Tree branches, seeds, strange plants, animal remains, even household objects washed away from distant villages. Excavations near ancient settlements have uncovered foreign botanical samples embedded in flood silt, revealing just how far the currents could carry things. You look at the drifting debris now and think, yep, that tracks. A child runs up beside you, pointing excitedly at something snagged in a patch of reeds. You both squint. Is that a skull? No, not a human one, thank goodness, but the sun-bleached head of a small antelope, slightly unsettling but mostly fascinating. The child declares proudly, "I'm keeping it," and sprints off before any adult can protest. Farther downstream, a wooden carving floats toward you, bumping gently against the bank. You fish it out with a stick. It's part of a figurine, a hand holding what looks like a flower or maybe a feather. Hard to tell. You turn it over in your hand, wondering what household shrine it once belonged to, and how far it travelled before ending up here. A fleeting reminder that the flood doesn't just reshape land, it reshapes stories. One co-worker arrives carrying a strange pod-like seed the size of a small melon. "This isn't from anywhere around here," he mutters. Everyone gathers around, poking it, sniffing it, shaking it like a suspicious container of spices. Someone declares confidently that it's magical. Someone else claims it's poisonous. A third person suggests planting it to see what happens. You silently hope no one does that. Flood season gardening seems like an invitation for more chaos. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Certain villages believed that odd objects carried by the flood were messages from the river gods, omens hinting at the year ahead. A broken pot might mean misfortune, a bundle of reeds meant health, a dead fish stuck inside a sandal supposedly signalled romance. You glance at the antelope skull child sprinting through camp and think, well, good luck interpreting that. You continue walking along the bank, observing more drift arrivals. A scrap of linen fabric clings to a branch, stained and torn but still patterned faintly with blue dye. Expensive stuff. Someone, somewhere, is probably mourning the loss of a favourite wrap. Another object bumps against the mud, a tiny clay jar sealed with pitch. You pick it up carefully, expecting it to be empty. It's not. Inside is honey, thick, golden, completely intact. You grin. The flood has finally delivered something useful. You're not the only one scavenging. People begin wading through shallow patches, fishing out anything that looks salvageable. Wood strips that could become tool handles, reeds good for weaving, even fragments of pottery. Flood season debris can feel like a treasure hunt, except the treasure smells faintly of algae. A group of workers haul in a large branch nearly the size of a man. Good firewood, one says. Driftwood burns hotter. Another nods, only half listening. He's staring at something floating behind the branch. You follow his gaze. A small goat carcass drifts past, stiff legs sticking out like it's doing the world's saddest backstroke. Historians still argue whether livestock deaths during the inundation significantly impacted rural economies, or if communities simply adapted to the losses. You suspect both are true, but right now your only thought is, someone upstream had a really bad night. Back at camp, people gather around the morning's haul, sorting items into piles. Useful, maybe useful, strangely shaped, keep anyway, and please get this away from me. You contribute the jar of honey, earning immediate praise and at least 3 marriage proposals, joking, mostly. For a brief moment, the entire mood lifts. Workers laugh as they compare finds. One man proudly displays an oddly curved branch he insists resembles the pharaoh's beard. Another brings a clump of foreign flowers, their petals still intact, wondering if they're edible. Nobody volunteers to test that theory. You sit on a dry patch near your shelter, turning the little carved hand over in your fingers again. It's smooth, worn, delicate despite its journey. You wonder what shrine it once belonged to, what prayers it accompanied, whether its owner will ever know where it ended up. Flood season complicates everything, your work, your food, your sleep. But sometimes, in its swirling confusion, it reminds you that the world upstream and downstream is connected, even through loss. You look at the drifting debris still floating past, carried onward towards some other village, some other camp, some other worker standing on their own muddy bank. The river takes. But it also sweeps pieces of distant lives right to your feet. You wake to a soft cough somewhere near your shelter. Not dramatic, not alarming, just one of those dry little throat-clearing coughs you hear every year around this time. You don't think much of it, until you hear another, and another. Then someone sniffles loudly. Then a child sneezes with the force of a startled goose. You sit up slowly, your stomach tightening with a familiar unease. Because this is the part of flood season nobody likes talking about. The illnesses that drift in quietly, just like the water. You step outside your shelter and stretch, blinking at the pale morning light filtering through the acacia branches. Nearby, 2 workers are hunched over a pot of hot water, trying to steam their congestion away. Farther down the path, an older woman massages her temples, muttering about flood headaches and water spirits crawling into sinuses. You're not sure that's scientifically accurate, but part of you doesn't want to question it. A mainstream fact surfaces in your thoughts. Flood season often brought spikes in waterborne sicknesses, fevers, stomach problems, and colds, thanks to standing pools, insect breeding, and contaminated runoff. Ancient medical texts describe treatments involving honey, herbs, and prayers, and occasionally things like placing a fish's tail on the forehead. You sincerely hope no one tries that today. You wander toward the central camp area, watching people go about their morning routines with slightly less energy than usual. Even the jokes are weaker. One man says, "If I cough any harder, I'll scare the crocodiles back upstream." But he wheezes in the middle of the punchline. You pat him on the back, which probably doesn't help, but it's the thought that counts. Then you see it. A puddle, larger than yesterday, stagnating in a shallow dip near the path. It's dark, murky, and buzzing with tiny flies living their absolute best lives. You cringe. That's sickness waiting to happen. A few workers toss sand over it, but the water just slurps it up and refuses to evaporate. The mud around it smells faintly sour. A quirky tidbit flickers through your mind. Some Egyptians believed that rotted water spirits caused fevers, and that leaving a garlic offering by the riverbank could keep them away. You catch a man quietly placing a clove at the water's edge. He sees you looking and shrugs. Can't hurt. Around mid-morning, you find yourself helping a woman carry jars from the ration tent when she pauses to press a hand to her forehead. "It's starting," she murmurs, "like every year." You nod grimly. Flood season fevers tend to roll in like unwelcome relatives, slowly, predictably, and in groups. Nearby, a scribe approaches the overseers with a tablet full of notes. You overhear him complaining that 5 workers reported stomach pains, 2 had chills, and 1 declared he saw a ghostly hippo walking through camp at dawn, which was later confirmed to be a pile of laundry. Still, the numbers worry people. Overseers exchange glances, whisper, and appear increasingly pinched around the eyes. You sit under your acacia tree, letting the breeze brush your face. A group of workers gathers a short distance away, discussing past seasons. One recalls a year when half the camp fell sick within days. Another mentions a particularly bad season when even the priests caught fevers, and rituals had to be performed by apprentices who kept forgetting the words. Historians still argue whether these outbreaks were severe epidemics or just seasonal clusters exaggerated in later retellings, but the truth is, even minor camp sickness feels major when you're living through it. A shadow falls across your mat. You look up to see your friend holding 2 cups of barley water. "Drink," he says. "You look like you're thinking too much." You take the cup gratefully. The drink tastes slightly sour. Fresher supplies haven't come in, but it's warm, comforting, familiar. A cough echoes from the weaving area. Another from the stone-cutting tents. Someone sneezes with impressive force. You sip your barley water and pretend everything is fine. It almost works. But there's something about flood season illness that gets under your skin. Maybe it's because it sneaks in without warning. Maybe it's because everyone's focus is already stretched thin from rising water, vanishing paths, thinning rations, and mysterious debris. One more worry feels like a balancing stone placed on an already overloaded basket. And yet, life continues. Kids play in the dust, chasing each other with reed toys. 2 workers argue over whether a certain herb actually cures fever or just makes your tongue numb. The kitchen fires burn steadily, boiling water, roasting breads, making the camp feel alive despite its aches and sniffles. You take a deep breath, letting the warm, earthy smell of the river settle your nerves. The coughs around camp feel quieter now, less alarming, more like background noise. People here have lived through dozens of flood seasons. They know how to endure, and so do you. Still, as you get up to help with chores, you can't help glancing once more at the stagnant puddle, and hoping it doesn't grow any bigger. You're hauling a bundle of firewood toward the new camp kitchen when someone calls your name. Sharp, urgent, cutting through the morning clatter like a thrown chisel. You turn, expecting to see an overseer with another relocation order, or maybe a co-worker stuck knee-deep in mud again. But instead you see something far worse. A young boy sprinting toward you, eyes wide, breath hitching, pointing frantically across the river. Your heart drops instantly. Because across the river, barely visible through the rising mist, lies the district where your family lives. You jog toward the edge of the bank, careful not to get too close to the unstable mud. A few workers gather beside you, shading their eyes. "What's happening?" one asks. The boy catches his breath and says, "The crossing is closed. The boatman turned back. The current's too strong." Your stomach tightens. That's not just inconvenient, that's dangerous. When the river gets too swollen, ferries can't run. And when ferries stop running, families get stranded. You've been separated during flood seasons before, but the uncertainty never gets easier. This time, it feels worse. The water is rising faster. The stories from upstream are stranger, and the river has already broken rules this season, sending crocodiles into work camps, swallowing paths, spitting out goat skeletons like macabre decorations. You take a step closer, gripping a reed pole for balance. The river rushes past with a forceful hiss, swirling and tugging at roots along the bank. You can't see your family's home from here. The bend in the shoreline hides it, but you imagine it. The little courtyard, the storage jars stacked neatly against the wall, your sister's woven reed mat drying in the sun, all sitting dangerously close to rising water. A mainstream historical fact flickers in your mind. During the inundation, entire communities could become temporarily isolated. Floodwaters cut off roads, swallowed footpaths, and turned small gaps into wide, impassable channels. Some families were separated for weeks, sending messages via boatmen or through temples acting as communication hubs. You suddenly feel a little sympathy for those ancient scribes who managed the chaos. A little. Behind you, a co-worker sits heavily on a rock. "My mother's village is downstream," he murmurs. "If the water rises more, the ferry won't even try the crossing." You nod because you understand perfectly. Flood season isn't just about mud and work. It's about emotional turbulence, wondering if your loved ones are dry, safe, fed, warm, or not. A fringe tidbit resurfaces from your memory. Some families carved small wooden dolls, set them afloat with prayers, and hoped the current would carry reassurance, or at least a sign, to relatives stranded across the river. You glance at the water and wonder if someone upstream is doing that right now. You hope the dolls don't look like crocodile snacks. You sit, on your heels, watching the current. It churns aggressively, swirling debris past your feet. A piece of pottery bounces along the surface before vanishing underwater. A moment later, a fresh branch whips by, almost hitting a worker farther down the bank. The river is flexing, showing off, reminding everyone who runs the show. A group of boatmen huddle on the dock. One waves you over, so you go. "We tried to cross," he says grimly. "Didn't make it halfway. The current pulled the stern sideways. Nearly lost a man." He gestures toward a soaked young rower trying to wring out his kilt while pretending not to shake. "No crossings until the water calms." "When will it calm?" you ask. The boatman's expression answers for him. No one knows. You walk back to the bank, the weight of uncertainty settling over your chest like wet silt. The camp feels different now. Thinner, more fragile. Conversations turn tense as more workers realize their families may be unreachable. One woman chews her thumbnail anxiously. Another stares at the water in silent dread. A father paces in tight, repetitive lines. Historians still argue whether flood season isolation strengthened community resilience or amplified communal fear. Watching your fellow workers now, you suspect both are happening simultaneously. Shared worry knitting everyone together while also sitting like a stone in every stomach. You sit under your acacia tree trying to focus on tasks, mending a torn rope, sorting wood, scraping mud off your tools. But your thoughts keep drifting. You imagine your family lighting the evening lamps. You imagine them checking the waterline every few hours. You imagine them making jokes the way your mother does when she's hiding worry. A co-worker places a hand on your shoulder. "The river rises and falls," he says softly. "Always has, always will." You nod. He's right. It won't stay high forever. But right now, with the current snarling and crossings closed, it feels like the Nile has stretched an uncrossable distance between you and the people you love. Evening settles slowly. Torches sputter. Workers gather for dinner with quieter voices, glancing at the river more often than their bowls. Someone coughs. Someone mutters a small prayer. The water keeps rushing. And you keep hoping. Because flood season brings many fears, but none compare to the fear of not knowing if your family sleeps safely tonight. The next morning begins with false hope, a sliver of sunlight, a faint breeze, the illusion that maybe things will get easier today. But the moment you arrive at the reorganized worksite, you see 3 overseers clustered around a wax tablet, arguing in sharp whispers. That's never good. Overseers only whisper when the news is either highly confidential or highly unpleasant. And flood season rarely gives out confidential blessings. You pretend not to stare, but it's impossible to ignore the tension in their shoulders. Finally, one of them, your team's overseer, the one whose stress wrinkles have become part of his permanent face, waves you over along with a few others. He clears his throat. "We're making adjustments," he says, effective immediately. You brace yourself, because adjustments is overseer code for someone's life is about to get more difficult. He scans his tablet, frowning. "We need extra hands on the southern embankment. The water's eating through the outer wall faster than expected. Your stomach sinks. The southern embankment is the most unstable part of the worksite. It's where mud chooses violence, tools disappear forever, and people sprain ankles with the enthusiasm of competitive athletes. He continues, "So we're reassigning workers, no arguments." Then he lists names, familiar ones, tired ones. Your name is among them. Fantastic. A mainstream fact pricks at the back of your mind. During the inundation, crews were often redistributed to emergency tasks: shoreline fortifications, canal redirection, debris removal, and levee construction. Records show workers being shuffled around with dizzying frequency. Today, you're living that tradition with all the enthusiasm of a man being volunteered to clean up after a festival. You follow the new team toward the southern stretch, trudging through increasingly soft ground. The mud here is wetter, darker, and moodier. The river presses insistently against the embankment, sloshing and gurgling like it's chewing on the edges. One co-worker sighs dramatically. "Why is it always this section that collapses?" Another snorts. "Because the river hates us, personally." A third adds, "Don't take it personally. The river hates everyone equally." Flood season humour at its therapeutic finest. When you reach the embankment, you see the problem immediately. A long, ugly slice of mud and clay has slumped inward, leaving a jagged gap where workers had packed it just days before. Water seeps through in thin, determined trickles. You set down your tools, mentally preparing for a long day of back-breaking labour. The overseer barks instructions: build a temporary barrier, move heavy clay blocks, reinforce with sandbags, pray the river doesn't laugh in your face. You nod, because what choice do you have? A quirky tidbit returns as you work. Some workers believed that unstable embankments were caused by angry river spirits, trying to reclaim land stolen by humans. Workers would sometimes leave small offerings tucked into the clay: honey, seeds, or even pieces of bread. Today you spot a tiny honey smear on a rock near the wall. Someone's already tried bribery. You appreciate the effort. Your task begins with hauling thick, waterlogged clay to the damaged area. It's as heavy as wet despair. Each block drips, slaps, and threatens to fall apart mid-lift. You trudge through mud that clings to your sandals like a possessive creature. Your muscles ache. Your patience thins, but you keep going, because reassigned tasks aren't optional, and the embankment won't fix itself. You and the team stack clay blocks against the collapsing wall, filling gaps, smoothing edges, tamping down slippery surfaces. Every few minutes, the river burps up another glug of water that seeps through like it's mocking your progress. "Can someone tell the Nile to stop moving for 5 minutes?" a worker mutters. "If you can find its ears," you reply. Another worker points at a swirling pattern in the current. "Maybe that's where the ears are." You all laugh, because the alternative is sobbing. Historians still argue whether these emergency rotations increased worker morale, giving people a sense of purpose, or crushed morale by piling on exhausting, risky tasks. Judging by the chorus of grunts, groans, and colourful muttering around you, morale today is mixed. By midday, sweat runs down your spine in steady rivers of its own. Clay cakes your arms, your legs feel like reeds struggling against the current. The overseer checks your progress, nodding with forced optimism. "Good, keep going," he says. Then, after a tiny pause, "And faster if you can." You stare at him, blinking slowly, as if we needed that clarification. Still, you dig deeper. You and your crew wedge thicker clay into vulnerable spots. You stomp the edges down with your heels. You drag more sandbags, stack them, restack them, adjust them, shove them into place, all while the river swirls just inches away, whispering that it could undo everything in a heartbeat. Late in the afternoon, a noise cracks through the air, a loud, wet Everyone freezes. The wall shifts. Water surges through a fresh gap, soaking your legs. You curse softly. The overseer curses loudly. Your entire crew leaps into action, piling clay and sandbags into the breach as fast as human bodies can manage. The wall holds. Barely. You collapse onto a dry patch, gasping. Your muscles throb, your hands shake. But you're proud. Exhausted, filthy, but proud. Flood season tests everyone. Today you passed a particularly unpleasant test. As you drag yourself back to camp at dusk, a co-worker bumps your shoulder and says, "At least they're done reassigning us for the day." You snort. "You mean until tomorrow?" He nods. "Exactly." Because during flood season, reassignment isn't a question. It's a rhythm, and you've learned to march to it. Even when the ground beneath you won't stay still. You barely sleep that night. Your body's exhausted, but your brain is still replaying the sound of the embankment cracking like a wet bone. When dawn finally crawls over the horizon, you drag yourself up, stretch your sore shoulders, and try to convince your legs that they are, in fact, part of a functioning human. They disagree, but the real test of the morning isn't your aching muscles, it's the voices, loud ones, sharp ones, coming from the canals. You trudge toward the commotion, already bracing yourself. Because when people start yelling during flood season, it's either an emergency, or two grown adults arguing like sleep-deprived toddlers. It's the second kind today. A cluster of officials, scribes, farmers and workers stand on the canal bank, shouting over each other with the energy of a family arguing over who misplaced the bread. You slip into the crowd, listening, trying to piece together the chaos. Apparently, the water that broke part of the embankment yesterday has now pushed into one of the irrigation canals, and now the farmers want the canal opened wider to protect their fields from drowning. The officials want it narrowed to save water for state storage. The scribes want precise measurements before anyone does anything, and the workers, they want everyone to stop yelling long enough to eat breakfast. You sigh. This is going to be a long morning. A mainstream fact floats to mind. Canal disputes were extremely common during the inundation. Records from multiple dynasties mention arguments over who controlled the flow, who got priority, who repaired what, and which direction the water should be allowed to go. Water wasn't just a resource, it was power, wealth, survival, and political leverage, all rolled into one muddy stream. You watch as an older farmer jabs a finger toward an official. If you close that gate, my crops drown. And then what? You compensate me with kind thoughts. The official, who looks like he hasn't slept since the last flood season, snaps back. If we open it, half the district loses their drinking water. Choose which disaster you prefer, a scribe steps in, very calmly, very politely, and very unhelpfully. We should make precise estimates before any decision is made. The farmer glares. The water doesn't care about your estimates. You'd laugh, but tension crackles through the air like static. You walk closer to the canal gate, a creaking wooden structure currently wedged halfway open, the water surging forcefully behind it. Workers stand ready with ropes, but no one wants to be the first to act while the shouting continues. Every option is bad. Open it too far, fields flood. Close it too much, village wells dry. Misdirect the water, and you'll have crocodiles sunbathing in people's courtyards again. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Long ago, some communities used clay figurines to vote on canal direction. People placed the figurines pointing toward the option they preferred, and whichever direction had more clay citizens won. It was democracy, flood season style. You kind of wish you had a sack of figurines right now. It might be quieter, but no, today you have humans shouting instead. Two officials bend over the canal plans, rolled out on a flat stone. They begin arguing about measurements. The silt level here is too high, one says. Your numbers are outdated, the other counters. A scribe interjects. Actually, his numbers are outdated and your silt map is wrong. Everyone groans. Historians still argue whether canal disputes were resolved more by actual engineering or simple exhaustion. People agreeing just to get the shouting to stop. Watching them now, you suspect exhaustion wins more often than not. The overseer nearest you turns and mutters, "Every flood season, every time. The canals are like toddlers, constantly needing attention and screaming when ignored." You nod sympathetically. You have vivid memories of toddlers. Canals are worse. Eventually, the argument reaches its dramatic peak when a farmer declares, "If this canal overflows into my barley field, I will personally swim to the palace and complain to the vizier." Someone behind him whispers, "He can't swim." Another replies, "The vizier won't care." You bite your tongue to keep from laughing. Finally, blessedly, another official steps forward and raises both hands. "Enough, we'll open the gate 1/3 more, monitor the fields. If levels rise too fast, we close it again." Everyone starts talking again, but at least it's not yelling. Workers grab the ropes. You help them plant their feet into the mud, grip the fibers tightly and tug. The gate groans. Water surges, a splash sprays your face, and you feel the vibration of the current pulling harder, like a very unhappy river spirit trying to negotiate its contract. The canal widens its flow. Farmers peer nervously downstream. Officials lean forward, scribes ready their tablets. Workers, including you, brace for whatever happens next. Slowly, slowly. The water stabilizes, for now. You exhale shakily, one argument down, 47 to go. As people disperse, you overhear someone mutter, Every flood season, the river decides the rules. Another replies, and we decide how loudly we complain about them. You smirk. Accurate. Walking back toward camp, exhausted but relieved, you glance sideways at the canal one more time. It's calm for the moment. But you've lived through enough floods to know calm canals cause the loudest arguments, because everyone is terrified of what happens when they stop being calm. Night settles slowly, stretching long shadows across the camp, as workers finish their meager meals and gather their blankets. You're just starting to unroll yours when a familiar, dreaded sound reaches your ears. The river moving differently, not louder, not faster, just differently. A deep, steady rumble beneath the surface, like distant thunder that never quite arrives. You freeze mid-motion, listening. Others hear it too. Conversations fade, bowls stop clinking. Even the camp dogs lift their heads in uneasy unison. Someone whispers, "It's too close tonight." And they're right. You step out from under your acacia tree and walk toward the edge of camp, following the flickering torchlight. A group of workers already stands there, staring at the water. It gleams with an unnatural brightness under the moon, silver, restless, whispering secrets none of you asked to hear. This is flood season reality, the nighttime watch. A mainstream fact drifts into your mind like a slow, heavy reed boat. During the inundation, workers often took turns staying up at night to monitor water levels. Embankments could fail without warning, canals could overflow, tents could be swallowed. A single hour's negligence meant waking to water lapping at your sleeping mat. So, every night someone stayed awake, usually several someones. Tonight, you're one of them. You volunteer, not because you want to, but because your brain won't let you sleep anyway. Flood season anxiety is its own kind of insomnia. You join the night watch circle, 6 workers with torches planted in the mud, a few half-filled sandbags for emergency use, and 1 battered clay jar of weak beer to keep spirits tolerably high. Everyone looks tired. Everyone looks alert. Everyone looks like they've made peace with the fact that tonight might be long. The river murmurs. The torches crackle. The air cools, but your skin stays warm with unease. A co-worker nudges you. "Hear that?" he whispers. A low glug pulses from somewhere just downstream. Another glug follows, louder this time, like water forcing its way through something it shouldn't. You hold your breath, waiting. A third glug echoes. The current shifts slightly, tugging the reeds into new angles. "Not good," someone mutters. Another worker tries to lighten the mood. "Maybe it's just a fish that ate too much." You smirk weakly. Joke quota fulfilled. The moon crawls higher, and the camp behind you settles into sleep. Soft snores, rustling blankets, the occasional cough. You sit on an overturned basket near the embankment, poking at the mud with a stick while keeping one eye on the water. The torch beside you sputters, spitting sparks. A fringe tidbit comes to mind, one your grandmother used to tell. Night spirits travel with the flood, and if you fall asleep near the water, they whisk you away downstream to become part of the river forever. You used to laugh at the story. Tonight you glance at the swirling current and decide to stay very, very awake. The hours creep on. A gust of wind rolls across the river, sending ripples flashing across the surface. The torches flutter, shadows dance along the mud banks. You hug your knees to your chest, not needing warmth, but wanting comfort. The river reflects moonlight in jagged streaks, almost metallic. You check the waterline every few minutes. It hasn't risen dramatically, but tiny changes matter. A finger's width now could become a forearm by dawn. Historians still argue whether ancient workers developed early flood alarm systems, bells, jars, markers, or if the best system was simply a bunch of terrified workers sitting up all night. Judging from your current situation, you're leaning toward the latter. Around midnight, the river growls again. This time everyone hears it. You and the other watchers rush closer, torches held high. Water sloshes over a low patch of bank, swirling around one of the torches and licking at its base. You act instantly, grabbing the pole and yanking it out before the river can steal it. A surge splashes your legs, cold and shocking. Your heart hammers. "The wall's shifting," someone whispers. Another torch reveals a fresh crack in the embankment, thin but long, stretching like a dark vein along the clay. The river presses against it eagerly. "Sandbags," the overseer hisses as he arrives, clearly summoned by the commotion. You and the others shove bags into the gap, packing mud around the edges, hands numb from the cold water. The current pulls at your arms, clay breaks apart under your fingers. The crack widens slightly before slowing, stabilized only by your frantic effort. Minutes drag. Finally, the water settles. The wall holds, again. Barely. Again. Breathing heavily, you slump onto the mud, letting the night air cool your sweat. The overseer nods at all of you, a rare look of genuine gratitude. Then he returns to his tent to pretend he's not terrified. The watch continues until dawn. Your eyes burn, your arms ache. Your hair smells like smoke and river water. But as the first pink line of sunlight stretches across the horizon, the worst of the night fear begins to dissolve. Camp wakes slowly. Pots clatter. Children yawn. Someone curses loudly as they step into a mud pit. Behind them, the river flows quietly once more, wearing a deceptively innocent face. And you, eyes heavy, feet raw, heart still pounding, realize why the night watch exists. Because the river is at its most dangerous when the world is asleep, and only a few of you stand between calm. You stumble through the morning in a fog of exhaustion, every movement slow and deliberate, like you're wading through invisible mud even when you're on dry ground. Your eyes feel gritty, your arms feel hollow, and your brain has the texture of stale barley bread. Night watch will do that to you, especially last night. But the Nile doesn't care if you're tired, and today it's in a mood. You hear it before you see it. The shift in the wind, the sudden agitation in the reeds, the slap of water against clay that's louder, sharper, more insistent than yesterday. You force your legs into motion, making your way toward the riverside with a rising sense of dread. And there it is. The calm surface you watched at dawn is gone, replaced by churning waves that smack against the embankment with a wet, angry rhythm. Wind whips across the water, carrying gusts that rattle tents and flip over lightweight baskets. The river and the wind have decided to team up today, and the alliance is terrifying. You take a step back instinctively. Because this is when things get dangerous. A mainstream fact flickers through your thoughts. Ancient Egyptian flood seasons were not always gentle, predictable rises. Some years brought violent surges driven by heavy rains or sudden upstream releases. The wind could turn the current into a battering ram, pushing water into canals and over banks faster than workers could react. Entire sections of land could shift overnight. You watch now as a wave slams into the embankment with a loud whud, sending droplets spraying halfway up your shins. Workers scatter, grabbing tools, baskets, sandbags, anything that isn't tied down. A few shout warnings. Clear the lower path. Get the children uphill. Don't stand near the edge. The river surges again. Water spills over the weakened section you patched 2 days ago. Clay chunks break away and tumble into the current like offerings. Someone swears aggressively. Someone else shouts for more reinforcement clay. You see the overseers rushing toward the chaos, their faces pale with that special blend of flood season fear and not again. You hop onto solid ground near your team and help shove heavy sandbags toward the failing area. The wind whips your hair into your eyes and tries to push you sideways into the mud. You lean forward, plant your feet, and drag a waterlogged bag that weighs roughly the same as a moderately angry ox. The sky darkens, not with storm clouds, just with the dust and moisture kicked up by the wind. The sun turns hazy behind a curtain of swirling grit. The air tastes like clay. Then, a deep roar rises from the water. You freeze. Everyone freezes. A massive wave rolls toward the embankment, not tall like ocean waves, but thick, powerful, the kind of surge that happens when the current shifts suddenly upstream. People shout, workers scramble, you throw yourself into motion on instinct alone. The wave slams into the wall shudders, water bursts through the smallest gaps like it's been waiting all week for this moment. Mud splashes your legs, clay sprays your hands, your heart ricochets inside your ribs. A co-worker beside you mutters a shaky joke. Great, the Nile's angry, we're doomed. But his voice cracks in the middle. You appreciate the humour attempt, but survival instincts are a little louder right now. A quirky tidbit floats up from your memory. Some flood season myths warned that when the water and wind rose together, it meant the river was waking a powerful spirit beneath its depths. People left offerings of oil to soothe it. You consider pouring out your entire ration bowl if it'll calm the current, but you realise the river would probably just gulp it down and demand dessert. You step back as the overseers shout orders, Reinforce the southern wall. Bring more clay. Hold the gate. Don't let the canal overflow. Workers form rushed, clumsy chains, hauling wet clay and sandbags as fast as human hands can manage. You join one, passing heavy lumps down the line. Every time you turn your head, the river looks different. Higher, rougher, darker. Historians still argue whether these violent mid-season surges were caused more by upstream rainfall patterns or by sudden shifts in river branches. You don't know the science, but your body knows the danger. The water feels alive today, agitated, almost vindictive. The workers nearest the wall brace themselves and slam the clay into cracks with their bare heels. Water gushes in anyway. Another wave hits. The wall gives a low, ominous groan. Then something terrifying happens. A tree trunk, where did it even come from, spins through the current and collides with the embankment like a battering ram. The impact sends a spray of water so high it drenches half the workers nearby. You choke back a yelp. Someone near you shouts, "Are you serious?" Another mutters, "The river is throwing furniture at us now." You laugh again, hollow, exhausted, but you keep working. Everyone does. Because despite the fear, despite the wind, despite the water trying to undo all of your efforts, no one runs. You reinforce the wall because it's the only thing standing between this camp and disaster. Your sandals slip several times, your hands bleed from scraping clay, your muscles scream. But the wall holds. Barely. Barely is enough. As afternoon turns to evening, the wind eases. The current relaxes. The waves shrink from furious slaps to annoyed ripples. The river calms like a creature tired of its own tantrum. Finally, someone says, "I think it's done." And the breath that leaves your lungs is so long and shaky it feels like you've been holding it since sunrise. You slump onto a dry patch of earth, covered in mud, drenched in sweat, smelling faintly of panic. Workers sag beside you like reeds after a storm. No one talks. No one needs to. You all survive the river's anger, for now, because flood season loves a cliffhanger, and the Nile always comes back for another round. The next morning arrives with a strange stillness, a kind of exhausted quiet that blankets the camp after a day of chaos. No crashing waves, no battering ram tree trunks, no unexpected river tantrums. Just the soft rhythmic sound of water, drifting, slowly, almost shyly, like the Nile. Tired itself out yesterday and now wants to pretend nothing happened. You sit up on your mat, stretching gently because every part of your body aches from yesterday's battle with the embankment. Your knees pop, your back protests, your arms feel like someone replaced your muscles with thin strips of papyrus, but despite the soreness, there's a tiny spark of relief inside you, because today feels different. Today feels like the river is retreating, not dramatically, not quickly, not heroically, just barely. An inch here, a ripple there, a few exposed patches of mud that were underwater yesterday. But when you've lived through enough flood seasons, you learn to appreciate even the smallest backward step the river takes. You wander toward the bank, cautious out of habit, scanning for crocodiles, floating debris, or rogue tree trunks sent to test your reflexes. Instead, you see something strangely beautiful, a long ribbon of fresh silt glimmering in the morning light, left behind as the water pulled back. A mainstream fact rolls into your mind. After the flood peak, the Nile's slow retreat created fertile layers of silt that farmers depended on. But for workers like you, those slow days of waiting, days when the water lowered by finger widths instead of by handspans, were some of the most frustrating. Work could not fully resume, but neither could anyone relax. It was productive limbo, and today you are squarely in limbo. You crouch near the waterline, dragging a stick through the mud. It carves a clean trail, too soft to stand on, too firm to ignore. The river's breathing feels gentler now, but each inhale, each tiny surge still makes your stomach tighten. Because retreat doesn't mean victory, it means patience. Behind you, workers stir slowly. Many slept in, recovering from the chaos of yesterday. Some emerge rubbing their eyes, others stretch stiffly, mumbling about sore arms and bruised shins. But there's an unmistakable shift in mood, lighter, calmer, almost hopeful. Almost. Because retreating floods have their own challenges. A co-worker plops down beside you with a grunt. "Mud's worse today," he says with the tone of a man delivering tragic news. You glance at his legs. They're coated up to the knees. "You fell in again?" you ask. He nods. "Twice." You pat his shoulder. "At least you're consistent." You both watch the river for a while, listening to its soft lap, lap, lap against the bank. Birds return to perches they abandoned during the worst of yesterday's wind. Dragonflies skim across the surface like tiny acrobats. Reed tops sway in slow waves. It almost feels peaceful. But then you hear a distant groan from the direction of the clay storage pits. Someone shouts, "It's still too wet. We can't cut anything today." You sigh. Of course, work depends on the land drying. Clay must firm up. Paths must stabilize. Canal levels must settle. Tools lost in the mud must be recovered. Or replaced. You stand and brush off your hands, knowing full well the day ahead will involve more waiting than working. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some workers believed the Nile retreated slowly because it was gathering its memories from the land, absorbing the stories of each season as it gave back the fields. People said the water pulled away only when it had learned everything it needed. You can't help smiling at the idea of the river gossiping with mud. Still, even retreat brings anxiety. You overhear someone muttering, "If it comes back tonight, I'm quitting. I'll start making pottery for a living." Another replies, "You said that last year." The first man waves a hand dismissively. Last year was different. It wasn't. You and your team check the embankment from yesterday. It's holding, for now. The clay you packed is rough and uneven, but solid enough. The sandbags sag but remain intact. The wall looks like a tired warrior after battle, but it's upright. You gently press your palm to the surface. Cool, damp, steady. Historians still argue whether these waiting days strengthened worker morale, giving people time to rest, or frustrated workers more by extending uncertainty. You can tell by the muttering behind you that your camp falls firmly into the frustrated category. By midday, the sun dries the top layer of mud enough for workers to start poking it with sticks, testing its firmness with cautious optimism. You join them, stepping carefully, leaving shallow footprints. Some paths are usable again, others swallow sandals like snacks. People cheer or curse depending on which patch they step on. Children run around, collecting newly exposed driftwood. One finds a tiny clay pot half buried in silt and holds it up triumphantly, as if discovering a pharaoh's secret treasure. A woman laughs softly, shaking her head. The river continues inching downward, slow as a sleepy cat stretching in the sun. A thin strip of shoreline emerges. The reeds stand taller. The current loses some of its bite, and you, standing there with your hands on your hips, breathing in the sharp, earthy scent of wet silt, feel a gentle loosening in your chest. Not safety, not yet, but the beginning of relief. Because this is the long retreat, the days when the river withdraws one shallow breath at a time, leaving behind uncertainty, exhaustion, and possibilities. You walk back toward camp, the ground squelching with every step, and think, if the river keeps retreating tomorrow, you might actually get back to real work, and maybe, just maybe, stop having nightmares about embankment cracks. By the time the sun climbs above the horizon the next day, you can already smell it. The earthy, chalky, oddly sweet scent of fresh Nile silt. Thick, heavy, clinging to everything. The river has pulled back just enough to reveal wide patches of newly exposed ground coated in dark, glistening mud that looks like someone spilled an entire pot of chocolate paste across the floodplain. It would be beautiful if you weren't the one who had to deal with it. You walk toward the work site, sandals sinking slightly into the drying sludge. Each step makes a faint sticky sound, the kind that threatens to steal your footwear if you don't lift your foot carefully. Workers around you trudge along, muttering about the mess, stretching their backs and mentally bracing for the sheer amount of labour awaiting them today. Because now begins one of the most exhausting parts of flood season, dealing with what the water left behind. A mainstream fact snaps into your mind like a guiding lantern. Once the Nile receded, it dumped vast layers of nutrient-rich silt, essential for farming but disastrous for construction crews. Silt-filled trenches, buried tools, softened work ramps, and sometimes even swallowed entire footpaths. Workers had to clear it by hand, basket after basket, day after day, in a process as tedious as it was backbreaking. You feel the weight of that truth immediately as you join the crew at the former storage yard. The space looks nothing like it did before the flood. The ground is uneven, rippled from the retreating water. A thick layer of silt has fused with old mud, creating ridges and pockets that hold puddles like miniature lakes. You poke one with a stick, watching it wobble ominously. Your co-worker groans beside you. Look at this disaster, you nod. Flood season's parting gift. You start digging, and dig, and dig. The silt is sticky and stubborn, refusing to release anything it has claimed. A buried rope emerges coated in clay so thick it looks like a petrified snake. A basket that was once neatly woven now resembles a lumpy clay sculpture a child might proudly present to a very patient parent. You set it aside gently. You're not emotionally prepared to decide its fate yet. As you and the others work, someone calls out from a nearby trench. You jog over, carefully avoiding a deceptively deep puddle. The worker points inside the trench. We're going to need a miracle, or 10 workers with stronger backs than ours. The trench is filled nearly to the top with silt. Not sand, not regular mud, silt. Dense, compacted, heavy enough to break a wooden shovel if you jab too hard. You test it with your foot. It doesn't move. You test it with a shovel. It moves, but only to stick to the shovel and make it 3 times heavier. Flood season, endlessly generous. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind to keep your spirits up. Some ancient workers believed that the silt came with hidden blessings from faraway lands, carrying fragments of distant soil, minerals, even lost memories from places upstream. People sometimes offered thanks to Happy, the god of the flood, for sending these gifts. You glance at the trench full of future back pain and whisper, "Thank you, Happy, but next year, maybe fewer gifts." Work continues. You haul baskets of silt, each one heavier than the last. You dump them into designated piles, only to realize the piles themselves are becoming small hills. The sun climbs, your arms ache, your legs wobble, your back contemplates resigning. Historians still argue whether workers cleared the silt immediately or waited for it to dry before moving it. Standing knee-deep in the stuff, you fully understand why the debate exists. Clearing it wet is miserable, but letting it dry turns it into cement. There is no winning, only choosing your preferred suffering. By midday, you've uncovered a collection of items the flood buried. A half-crushed clay pot, 3 chisels, 2 broken, 1 intact, a child's reed toy shaped like a duck, a wooden spoon you suspect was stolen from the kitchen in a dramatic midnight snack attempt, and, bafflingly, a perfectly smooth stone that everyone keeps passing around because it's strangely soothing to hold. The camp's mood teeters between exhaustion and fascination. As afternoon heat presses down, you take a moment to rest, sitting on a dry patch of earth overlooking the silt-covered expanse. The ground glimmers in the sunlight, dark and rich. Soon, farmers will celebrate this layer, this promise of fertile fields and abundant crops. But for now, for you, it's simply the enemy of progress. Still, there's a strange beauty to it. The Nile has withdrawn. The land is reshaping itself, and you are part of the reshaping. A breeze stirs, lifting the scent of wet earth into the air. Workers around you pause, wiping sweat from their brows. Even the overseers look too tired to fuss. Slowly, steadily, the worksite begins to resemble itself again. Paths reappear, tools are recovered, structures regain their shape, and the silt, mountains of it, gets pushed aside one basket at a time. As the sun begins to dip, you stretch your aching arms and stare across the floodplain where the river once raged. Now it looks calm, innocent even, as if it wasn't actively trying to eat your camp a week ago. You shake your head. Flood season never ends quietly. It just shifts into its final phase. The cleanup, the rebuilding, and the quiet wondering of what next year will bring. The morning after the great silt-hauling marathon, you wake with a strange feeling. Not fear, not dread, not even exhaustion, though that's still lingering in every muscle. It's something softer, something like acceptance. Because today is the day everyone in camp knows is coming. The day you begin preparing for next year's flood cycle. Even though this year's hasn't fully finished packing its bags yet, you sit up, slowly, knees cracking like dry twigs, and rub your eyes. Around you, workers rise with the cautious optimism of people who've survived chaos and are now ready to negotiate with their muscles about continuing to exist. You grab your tools, what's left of them, and head toward the riverbank where the overseers have already gathered. They're checking tablets, making lists, and pretending not to look traumatized by the memory of tree trunks flying at their embankments. One of them nods at you. Good. We need everyone today. No explanation, no warm-up. Just, we need everyone, which is over-supervisor language for work is about to get very tedious. You join the group walking toward the old measuring platform, the one with the faded markings and worn-down stones. It survived the flood, barely, but the waterlines carved into it have been smoothed by the season's rise and retreat. Someone will need to rescore them. Someone will need to wipe the silt from the base. Someone will need to update the markers for next year. Spoiler, someone is all of you. A mainstream fact enters your mind as you stare at the ancient columns. The Nile cycles were recorded meticulously for centuries. Each flood left physical and administrative marks. New notches, new tablets, new predictions. Nilometers were the closest thing the ancient world had to weather reports. But whatever data they held meant nothing if workers didn't maintain them. You kneel with a reed brush, clearing out packed mud from the lowest grooves. The clay crumbles like damp bread. A co-worker chisels fresh lines near the upper section, muttering about how last season's marks were already hard enough to read. Another uses a smooth stone to polish the chipped edges. As you work, the river gurgles quietly behind you. You feel its presence, not threatening, not angry, just watching. Observing you as you prepare for its return, the ritual everyone repeats even though it never truly gets easier. A quirky tidbit pops into your brain while you brush silt from the carvings. Some ancient workers believed that recutting the flood markers reminded the river to behave next year. Like you were giving it instructions. You glance at the water and mumble, "Please behave," just in case superstitions hold weight. When the measuring stones are cleaned, the overseers lead you along the bank, stopping where the embankment took its worst hits. The wall looks exhausted, patched in lumps, sagging in places, water-stained from battles it didn't ask for. Your job is to strengthen it for the next year, so that next year you can watch it slowly fall apart again. The cycle is eternal, a cosmic joke, but it's also the backbone of your life here. You push clay into cracks, smoothing it with your hands, you set new stones, you stack sandbags where the bank is weakest. Workers all around you do the same, moving with the tired choreography of people who have done this every year since childhood. Someone sighs loudly. Someone replies, "Better fix it now than rebuild it from scratch next year." Someone else adds, "If the river doesn't eat it in a single gulp again." Flood season humour, dry as the desert, even when surrounded by mud. Historians still argue whether these end-of-season repairs were symbolic or genuinely effective. After living through this cycle yourself, you're convinced they were both. Repairs gave structure, purpose, a sense that humans weren't just passengers on the Nile's wild ride, they were participants, negotiators, partners, occasionally victims, but rebuilding also meant hope. Because if you prepare the banks, maybe the river will spare you next year. Maybe. By midday, the embankment looks more stable. Still rough, still vulnerable, but better. Then the overseers shift focus. "Canal markers," one calls. "Update the storage maps," shouts another. "We need new flood height projections," yells the scribe, already fanning himself dramatically. You spend the afternoon carving new lines into wooden stakes destined for the canal routes. You help reroute small drainage paths. You restack supply stones. You watch other workers rebuild the temporary shrine to Happy, placing fresh offerings, lotus, honey, a few brave figs, because everyone hopes a well-fed flood god is a generous flood god. The river shimmers. The sun warms your back. The camp bustles around you. For the first time in many days, no one is shouting. No one is running. No one is fleeing the sound of cracking embankments. Instead, everyone is preparing, reflecting, breathing again. And as the day stretches into golden dusk, you find yourself standing at the top of the newly reinforced bank, staring down at the slowly retreating water. You inhale deeply. The river smells like wet clay and fading danger. For the first time in weeks, you feel something gentle settling in your chest. The calm that comes after fear, the understanding that cycles end so they can begin again, and the soft, warm realization that you survived another flood season. Maybe not gracefully, maybe not cleanly, but you survived it. And tomorrow, you'll wake and begin the long, simple work of normal days again, stacking stones, shaping blocks, patching walls, sharing jokes, eating porridge that hopefully contains actual barley. Flood season will return, it always does, but when it does, you'll be ready again. And now, as the last light slips behind the distant dunes, your breath softens, your shoulders loosen, and the rhythm of the Nile becomes a slow, steady lull beneath the dusk. The river, once angry and unpredictable, now glides past with a gentler voice, as though it too is settling into rest. The banks you rebuilt stand quiet, touched by long shadows and evening gold. The air cools, sliding softly across your skin like a reassuring hand. You feel the day dissolving around you, the noise, the labour, the strain all fading, into the warm, heavy comfort of night. Workers move about in slower steps now, voices softened, gestures unhurried. A few laugh quietly. Someone hums a simple tune. The world seems to exhale with you, long and slow. Imagine yourself sitting just above the water, the fresh silt beneath you firm but warm, the sky stretching in soft colours. The breeze brushes your cheek. Your thoughts drift, loose and light, like feathers floating just above the surface. Nothing urgent remains, nothing loud, nothing sharp, only a quiet certainty that the hardest days have passed and gentler ones lie ahead. Let the soft wash of the river fill your mind, steady, measured, rhythmic. Let each breath match its flow, rising and falling like the calm water at your feet. The world grows dimmer, softer, heavier, and you feel yourself sinking into a restful quiet. For now, everything is steady. Everything is safe. The flood has retreated, the camp has found its balance, and the night wraps itself around you like a warm, quiet blanket. Let your eyes grow heavy, let your thoughts grow slow, and let the river carry you effortlessly into sleep.